King Charles versus Prince Andrew, Siege of Royal Lodge. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. It is always interesting when narcissists collide. Sometimes they combine and you have narcissistic cementation. In other instances, they combine and work for a short-term mutual benefit. In other instances, there is some form of collision. Charles and Andrew are of different sub-schools. One operates with a facade, the other does not. And they are at loggerheads. Let's dive in and learn more. Seen, of course, through the prism of narcissism. There is an article that appears in the Times from Kate Mancy, which tells us, when the King, then Prince of Wales, met his brother, the Duke of York, at Birkhall, in the weeks before their mother died in 2022, lunch was not on offer. The brothers' conversation was perfunctory, with neither wishing to prolong the agonising encounter. Charles had the unpleasant task of breaking the news to Andrew that there was no way back for him in terms of royal duties. Assertion of control, threat to Andrew's control. The controversy over his friendship with a convicted sex offender, sense of entitlement, the American financier, Jeffrey Epstein, was not going away, and the palace was preparing for its greatest transition in 70 years. Andrew became tearful during the exchange. Self-pity, pity play, attempt to nullify threat to control. For the Duke, aged 64, there would be no more official duties. No horse riding at Trooping the Colour, no balcony appearances, and no convivial Christmas dinners with the Grenadier Guards, the regiment of which he had been colonel. Stripping him of all of that wounds him. It damages his esteem and goes to threaten his sense of control by taking away things which made him look important. Despite serving in the Royal Navy during the Falklands conflict, he would later learn that he would be allowed to wear his uniform at his mother's vigil, but not at her funeral. He remains a Knight of the Garter, but is not permitted to take part in the annual public procession, wounding. His royal life as he knew it was over. However, if Charles thought that this might be an end to the sorry episode, then he was mistaken. The King has made it clear that he is not willing to continue to fund Andrew's lifestyle at Royal Lodge, the vast home in Windsor Great Park that was home to the Queen Mother until her death in 2002. Residence there, of course, is a residual benefit for Andrew. Andrew, however, is refusing to budge, much to the frustration of his brother, threat to his control. Many fear the Duke is making a point of the matter, even though he knows that there can never be a full rehabilitation back into the fold. The fact that Andrew can't find his way back into being a full working member of the royal family naturally is problematic for him. The fact that his brother threatens his sense of control, his subconscious sense of control, by cutting off the funding for his residence is similarly problematic. However, he looks to fight back against these two threats to control by being intransigent and not moving. That exhibits his sense of entitlement, the absence of emotional empathy for those affected by his decision to remain. It means that the King, who continues his cancer treatment, is now embroiled in a battle of wills with the brother 11 years his junior. Andrew has the lease on Royal Lodge, but Charles controls the purse strings. As one source familiar with the situation says, the King's kindness is not without limit, and there is a very good option for Andrew to move into Frogmore Cottage, recently vacated by the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, which also has the benefit of being within the Windsor Castle security cordon, hence reducing the need for alternative round-the-clock security for Royal Lodge. Thus, moving him there would be a residual benefit, but it's seen as reduced status by removing him from the Royal Lodge to Frogmore Cottage. Also, perhaps he's less interested in staying in a place that may well have Harry's jizz stains within it. He's taking longer than desirable to recognise the reality of the situation, even though it is clearly the most sensible course of action. Now, of course, that observation is issued by somebody that doesn't know that Prince Andrew is a narcissist. because he sees the world through his own reality, through his distortion field, rather than the reality that other people share. If he doesn't agree to move to a property better suited to his needs, then the king may have to reconsider the levels of support he is willing to provide. The name Royal Lodge suggests a far more modest property than is in fact the case. A sprawling estate, it encompasses some 40 hectares within the heart of Windsor Great Park. Beyond the imposing front gate with the old police accommodation on either side, now used for private security guards, guests follow a road down to the main 30-room, 7-bedroom Grade 2 listed house. The estate includes a gardener's residence, 6 cottages for live-in staff, and a police suite, providing accommodation for security officers. Inside the property, a grand drawing room or saloon designed by Geoffrey Wyatville as a dining hall fit for a king, features 5 sets of arched Gothic windows. The grounds, which were designed by renowned landscape architect G.A. Jellicoe, include a west terrace linking to the garden and further down an embankment, a swimming pool with changing rooms, and a tennis court near the woods. There's also an area where Andrew can practice his golf. A substantial Wendy house stands in the grounds, a gift for the late Queen from the people of Wales when she was still Princess Elizabeth. While not part of the leased property, the private royal chapel, where the Princess Beatrice married Edoardo Mappelli Mozzi in July 2020, is within the lodge's boundary. Thus, this is a substantial property which, of course, causes Andrew to want to hold on to it because there's substantial status associated with it, which, as a narcissist, it's important. As a somatic narcissist, the material things matter in life. He's hypersexualized, hence the title Randy Andy, but that isn't relevant here. Appearances matter to him, and as the Duke of York, he believes that he ought to have a substantial property that's paid for by other people, namely his sense of entitlement. And therefore, any attempt to remove him from this property is a substantial threat to his control. Apparently, the property was something of a money pit. Bomb explosions nearby during the Second World War were thought to have disturbed the groundwork of the lodge. The article then just talks more about some of the property aspects of the lodge. And then talks a little bit about how some of it's in a state of disrepair. Some of the outhouses have paint peeling off the walls. Inside, shelves heave with Sarah Ferguson's collection of novelty teapots, while Andrew is known for his love of teddy bears. A friend and visitor to the lodge says Sarah is a collector and Andrew is just as bad. He likes to surround himself with stuff, which seems to act like some sort of reassurance in life. Well, that's his somaticism, that he likes to hold on to material items. Beatrice's husband, who is chief executive of a property and interior design company, has tried to yank it into something much more manageable. Like the surroundings, Andrew cuts an increasingly tragic figure. With no discernible role, he spends his days watching television in a darkened room. Before the change of reign, Andrew was seen out riding with his younger brother, the Duke of Edinburgh. And the pair have been riding together as Edward prepares to ride in this year's Trooping the Colour parade. Often Andrew has the horse brought to him, a local says. You see it coming in a horse box 3 times a week to the lodge, and he goes riding from there. Sense of entitlement, of course, to have the horse brought to him. And the fact that he stays away from public life, of course, he's not given any public role, but he still effectively stays in hiding, is part of him nullifying potential threats to control by staying in a position of withdrawal. He won't be in a fuel crisis because he will interact with Fergie, he'll interact with his daughters, he'll interact with staff, other members of his family, etc. So he'll still receive fuel from all of those people in his fuel matrix. But the watching of the television in a darkened room is part sulking, thus pity play, but also because he doesn't actually have anything else to do other than sit and watch television, and is part of the withdrawal so that he removes himself from those that might continue to threaten his sense of control. The latest Vanishing Act was quite different from his demeanour in February, when he proudly led the royal family down to St George's Chapel for the memorial service of King Constantine II. The optics of Andrew heading the party were judged to be suboptimal, according to one insider, who was only too aware of the reputational risk that the Duke still poses to the family. His continued tenure at Royal Lodge has irked those at the very top of the institution. Former aides are not rushing to help the Duke. Loss of residual benefit. They still remember being on the receiving end of his hairdryer treatment, heated ignited fury, where he would shout at them, basic manipulation, for various misdemeanours. They knew, too, that Andrew was stubborn. His intransigence, of course, born out of a sense of entitlement. The situation over his lodgings has now reached such a standoff that it has been dubbed the Siege of Royal Lodge. It is precisely the sort of military language that the Duke might understand. Despite fighting from a disadvantaged position with no discernible allies, Andrew nevertheless has one key weapon in his arsenal, a 75-year lease on the property that does not expire until June 15th, 2078. Andrew took over Royal Lodge from his grandmother, the Queen Mother, who lived there until her death at the age of 101. He moved in the following year, paying nearly £7 million to carry out extensive repairs and renovations on the property. If he left during the first 25 years of his tenure, Andrew would be entitled to get some of the initial outlay back on a sliding scale. Rather than grace and favour residents, Royal Lodge is let under a commercial lease arrangement with the Crown Estate. Andrew paid an initial £1 million, with a notional rent understood to be £260,000 a year. If the Duke dies, the lease can only pass to named members of his immediate family. The lease, which the author has seen, stipulates that Andrew must also repair, renew, uphold, clean and keep in repair and where necessary rebuild. Under the planned maintenance guide set out in the lease, he must clean the external paintwork, have it repointed and paint the walls with 2 coats of paint every 5 years from 2008 onwards. It means that this work was due to have been completed last year. Inside, he is committed to paint with at least 2 coats of paint and to paper polish, decorate and otherwise appropriately treat the interior walls every 7 years from 2010 onwards. This is due to be completed this year. While the landlord is listed as the Queen's Most Excellent Majesty and her successors, it makes clear that the Duke is a tenant of the Crown Estate, which returns the profits from its £16 billion property, land and seabed portfolio to the Treasury. While it is operated independently and not owned by the King, it helps fund the royal family from a portion of the profits. From this year, this will be reduced from 25% to 12%, with Charles saying that he wants the profits to be used for the wider public good. Facade management. A friend of the Duke says, the facts remain the facts. He's got a long lease on Royal Lodge, the family's lived there for 20-odd years, and still have 50-odd years to run on the lease. It's in perfectly good repair because they spent the lion's share of the sale of their previous house, Sunning Hill Park, renovating it from top to bottom, thereby saving any draw on the public purse or the private finances of the royal family. Them's the facts. Another acquaintance who has visited Royal Lodge says it's really rather sad, but if it's a case of who will blink first, then Andrew is going to dig in. He ain't going anywhere. He has had a stay of execution with Sarah and the King's illnesses, and he will be hoping that Charles won't want to be seen as vindictive by turfing him out. Facade management. The law may well be on his side. Tim Foley, property disputes partner at Freeths, says the lease means that not much can be done to change that without his agreement. His landlord, the Crown Estate, will expect him to maintain it as a royal property to an agreed standard. But even if there is a dispute over that, the dispute is unlikely to mean the Duke is to move out. Even if he can keep the tenancy by law, the question remains how can Andrew possibly find the money to continue to live in such a lavish property without his brother's largesse? Charles funds Andrew's £3 million a year security bill. The Home Office removed his police detail once he had stepped down from official duties. Providing static security guards and mobile ones, the King grants the Duke an initial living allowance thought to be well in excess of £1 million a year. If Charles were to withdraw these payments, which are residual benefits for Andrew, he would have to fund his own security, housekeepers, gardeners and home improvements. Andrew receives a modest naval pension, but it is understood that he didn't receive a windfall from his mother's estate, a fortune estimated to be worth £650 million. The sovereign's will remains private upon their death. However, the estate passes to their heir and successor, in this case Charles. The Yorks did, however, get to keep the corgis. When Andrew and Fergie married, intimate partner primary source, the Queen gifted them, residual benefits, Sunning Hill Park on the edge of Windsor Great Park, a new-build 12-bedroom mansion unfavourably likened to a Tesco superstore and nicknamed South York, a play on JR's vulgar Pyle South Fork Ranch in the 80s soap opera Dallas. The Yorks divorced in 1996 and the house was put up for sale in 2002. Timur Kulibayev, a Kazakh oligarch, curiously paid £15 million for the property, £3 million more than the asking price. Representatives for the Duke and Kulibayev have always stated there was another potential buyer and that it was a purely commercial and legitimate transaction. Kulibayev demolished the house a few years later and started again from scratch. Meanwhile, Andrew was relocated to Royal Lodge with his ex-wife moving in later. The couple put their Swiss ski chalet on the market for an estimated £17 million, but it is thought to have sold for less than the asking price, and some of the proceeds were used to clear debts related to the property. The previous owner, Isabelle de Rouvre, claimed that the Yorks owed £6.6 million on the chalet, but later confirmed the debt had been settled. In 2022, Sarah Ferguson bought a £5 million townhouse in Mayfair as an investment. While his ex-wife has a career as a novelist, it's not known whether Andrew has any additional income. While friends of the King say that he's willing to afford his brother a comfortable lifestyle out of his private funds from the Duchy of Lancaster, the level of funding must be appropriate. This, of course, provides King Charles with a form of leverage, enabling to assert control. One friend of the King says, "Unfortunately, if Andrew refuses to leave within a reasonable time frame, then the King may be forced to reassess the whole package of support he provides, and the Duke will be required to fund the lion's shares of his security, accommodation, and lifestyle costs, all on his own threat, which, given the sums involved, is highly unlikely to be possible in the long term. Everyone is mindful of his well-being and has his best interests at heart, but there are limits of patience and tolerance. A move to Frogmore Cottage for Andrew would make an immediate saving. While friends of Charles say that the King would continue to pay for mobile security, he would not have to provide static security for the building. Those with knowledge of Frogmore say that it is a turnkey property, meaning that it is in good condition thanks to the work carried out by the Duke and Duchess of Sussex before their relocation to America. Andrew can't have been cheered by the latest opinion poll, which revealed him to be the least popular member of the royal family by far, threat to control. A YouGov survey showed that he was popular with only 9% of people, while 76% said they disliked him. Although I'm sure that this one's wife is very pleased that he exists, as it stops her from being bottom. Yet it wasn't always the case. A story in The Sun in 1977 reported that 17-year-old Andrew wowed the crowds with his movie star looks and elegant charm. Even Charles ruefully admitted that Andrew was the one with the Robert Redford looks of the family. This links into his somaticism. The late Queen appeared to treasure Andrew in a way that must have rankled with Charles, her son and heir, threat to control. After the birth of Charles and Anne, nearly 10 years would pass before Andrew was born in 1960. By then, the Queen had a second chance at motherhood and seemed able to devote more time to her younger sons, Andrew and then Edward, who followed 4 years later. Until the birth of Prince William in 1982, Andrew was the spare. At a time of male primogeniture, which pushed Anne further down the order. Andrew was therefore afforded all the privilege shown to Charles, with an extra dose of indulgence from his mother, and more importantly, a good deal more freedom, which, of course, a narcissist would lap up. His service as a helicopter pilot during the Falklands conflict only added to his popular appeal, returning to Portsmouth on board the aircraft carrier HMS Invincible, aged 22. Andrew's love of the good life, somaticism, sense of entitlement, and his willingness to accept freebie trips on rich friends' private jets, sense of entitlement, earned him the nickname Air Miles Andy. However, it was his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein that would prove to be his downfall. Epstein and his partner, Ghislaine Maxwell, 62, who was serving a 20-year prison sentence for helping the disgraced financier sexually abuse young girls, were guests of Andrew at Buckingham Palace along with the actor Kevin Spacey. Andrew travelled on Epstein's jet and stayed in his New York townhouse for several nights, residual benefits, after flying to the United States so that he could do the honourable thing of telling the convicted sex abuser in person that their friendship was over. Virginia Giuffre, one of Epstein's victims, brought a civil case against Andrew for claims that he had consistently denied. The matter was settled out of court, with the Duke making an undisclosed payment reported to be as much as £12 million. In November 2019, Andrew stepped down from royal duties. He resigned from his public roles the following May. His honorary military affiliations and royal charitable patronages were removed by his mother in 2022, all of which causes wounding. If the public awareness of Andrew's self-inflicted misfortunes was on the wane, there have been some high-profile reminders. A popular feature-length Netflix show recently recounted the Duke's disastrous Newsnight interview about his friendship with Epstein. The palace is braced for another retelling of the saga when Amazon releases A Very Royal Scandal in the autumn, with Michael Sheen playing the Duke. There is a glimmer of hope, however, that the battle of the brothers might be resolved amicably thanks to Sarah Fergie Ferguson and the York's daughters, Beatrice and Eugenie. The princesses are willing to represent the royal family despite not holding positions as working members of the institution. They were seen last month supporting Prince William at a garden party at Buckingham Palace and are expected at other set pieces of the summer, including Ascot and Trooping the Colour. It helps too that the king is fond of his nieces and their mother. Charles is mindful that Fergie has also endured a cancer diagnosis, undergoing a mastectomy after the discovery of breast cancer and then enduring melanoma too. Together with Camilla, Charles has brought her back into the fold with a warmth not seen during the previous reign. She joined the royal family for church appearances at Christmas and Easter, facade management. There are those in royal circles who believe Sarah could even help Andrew see sense over his living situation by encouraging to downsize so as not to bite the hand that feeds him. While Andrew has been bullish about his right to remain in Royal Lodge, Sarah has been sanguine. In a recent interview she said, "When I'm in the UK I'm lucky enough to stay at Royal Lodge. I wouldn't call it my home as that would be presumptuous." Yet, it has been the family home for the Yorks and their daughters for years, with Eugenie holding her wedding reception at the lodge. The king knows that blood is thicker than water, but his responsibility to protect the monarchy and everything it represents come first, and of course, that translates into facade management and he won't hesitate to assert control over his brother. If Andrew gave up the lease for Royal Lodge or sold it back to the Crown Estate, it could be let to another private tenant, provided they pass security checks. The Prince and Princess of Wales are adamant that they are happy nearby Adelaide Cottage, although they would be a more natural fit for the lodge. Meanwhile, time is ticking for Charles, who wants the problem resolved, demonstrating his usual impatience. He does not wish to be seen as a soft touch, and has met with General Sir Patrick Sanders, Chief of the General Staff, to discuss how the respected military man might help. A friend of Charles says it can be done tidily or untidily. It can be done with grace and dignity, or it can be forced upon him. It's all rather sad, but as things stand, life at Royal Lodge is set to become increasingly cold and uncomfortable for the Duke. The only question now is when he will realise that he's become a prisoner of his own pride, and that handing back the keys will afford him far greater comfort and the continued support of his family. Thus, Charles, running out of patience and wanting to withdraw the residual benefit, may well threaten Andrew's sense of control, his subconscious need for that control, by making it so that he can't afford to live in the Royal Lodge any longer. Andrew naturally feels like he's under siege, that he's lost his titles, that he's lost his privileges and patronages, and now he stands to lose a property which he sees as being fit for a prince, and that the alternatives are not. Ultimately, it might prove to be the case that he decides to be the one to move, thus nullifying the threat to control, swallowing the loss in status under the auspices of deciding that it's his decision, and that his narcissism will cause him to decide that actually, I wanted to move all along. I've never really liked staying at the Royal Lodge. It was too big for just me rattling along on my own. This, of course, demonstrates the hypocrisy of the narcissist, that they will say that they want to do something, I want to stay in the Royal Lodge, it's my home, nobody's making me move, and then they'll suddenly change their mind because factors shift within the matrix of their operations, and then all of a sudden, oh, I've always wanted to move, it was always my intention to do so, which is a revision of history. I recall many years ago poaching an excellent employee away from somebody else, and I decided to rub it in by giving that rival a call. I wanted to needle him, so I called and I said, just ringing to make sure everything's all right, with the consequence of A, joining us. Oh, absolutely no problem at all, he said. He was a narcissist. In actual fact, the timing couldn't be better. I knew that the timing was not good at all for him. But his need to try and nullify the threat to control posed by The loss of that key individual and, of course, my call meant his narcissism revised history to cause him to believe that it was the perfect time to jettison an employee that he relied upon quite heavily. Similarly, Prince Andrew may well change his mind because his narcissism dictates that that is what is to be done. And, of course, whatever he decides upon is always right, because the narcissist is always right. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.